Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We're running a few minutes late, so we will jump right into it. We have three witnesses who have been kind enough to give us some time today from Meadow Lake Tribal Council Industrial Investments. We have Tina Rasmussen from Nooitka Capital Advisors, Don Roberts, and from the United Steelworkers, we have Jeff Bromley. Each of you are going to be given up to 5 minutes for opening remarks, and then we'll open the floor to questions. You're free to speak in English or French. Translation services are available. So why don't we jump right in? Mr. Roberts, I happen to look at you first, so why don't you start us off?
Sure. Bonjour, mesdames and messieurs. Thanks very much for the opportunity to speak to the committee today. I've been asked to discuss the economic recovery of the forestry sector with a special focus on pathways to a low-carbon future. So my name is Don Roberts. I'm the founder and CEO of Nooitka Capital. And Nooitka Capital, it's an investment banking firm focusing on the renewable energy and clean technology sectors, but with a special emphasis on the emerging bioeconomy. I've been associated with the forest products sector for over 40 years. And prior to starting Nooitka in 2013, I was vice chairman of investment banking with CIBC, where I founded and led the bank's renewable energy and clean technology team. So as I said, I'm here to speak to the ongoing transformation of the Canadian forest sector through innovative uses of wood-based products, and to try to propose some concrete measures to support Canada's goal to reduce carbon. So where are the opportunities? Well, in assessing the alternatives, I'd like to draw on what's called the Wood Fibers Future Report, which I co-wrote earlier this year for the government of New Zealand. The objective of that report was to show how the forest resource could be leveraged to support New Zealand's move to a net zero emission economy by 2050. And quite frankly, the conclusions are equally applicable to Canada. After reviewing over 100 emerging products made from lower value woody biomass, we settled on two with the most commercial promise. The first is bio-crude oil, which can be directly used for heat and power applications or further processed, and this is important, into a suite of transportation fuels, biochemicals, and biomaterials. The second product is bio-coke, or torrefied wood, which can be used for steel making. The good news is that Canadian forestry firms are already partnering with innovative biotech Canadian firms to construct bio-crude oil plants. For example, AE Bioenergy, a joint venture between Quebec-based Arbeck Forest Products and Ottawa-based Ensign Technologies, built a 40 million liter bio-crude plant in Côte-Nord, Quebec in 2018. And out west, RBS Biotech, which is a joint venture between BC-based Canfor and Australia-based Licella, are currently considering the construction of a commercial bio-crude plant in Prince George. For the other product, although it's more of a niche market, bio-coke or torrefied wood can be used as a substitute for metallurgical coal in the production of iron and steel. Given the relatively high carbon intensity of traditional steelmaking technologies, this could well be an attractive emerging market for lower quality wood from the forest sector. Things are already happening here. ArcelorMittal, which is Dofasco's parent, is working to build a 50,000 ton per year bio-coke plant in the Netherlands. And Dofasco itself is currently working with several bio-coke technology providers to build a demonstration plant in their Canadian steel mill. There's also a meaningful opportunity, though, for products derived from high-value solid wood to reduce carbon emissions in the built environment. Specifically, the opportunity revolves around the ability to reduce carbon emissions through carbon sequestered, carbon avoided, and carbon eliminated. And I've identified specific technologies and products in my longer written submission. So what's the role of government here? Well, in our view, the most effective policy tool to support the move to a low carbon future is a flexible regulation, which focuses on a specific sector that emits a lot of carbon. Such regulations set specific carbon intensity targets and then let private sector actors figure out the best way of meeting the targets. Compliance is facilitated through the use of tradable carbon credits. Now, such flexible regulations, in our view, foster the most innovative use of technologies because they're technology and feedstock agnostic, and they leave decision making in the hands of the private sector. Now, importantly, I think especially given our COVID situation, such tools are not a direct cost to the public treasury. since the burden of compliance is borne by the heavy carbon emitters. This is essentially an application of the polluter pays principle. Now, the government of Canada is already working on the development of a clean fuel standard for specific sectors, and low carbon fuel standards focusing just on the transport sector already exist in BC, California, and Germany. And as documented by the International Energy Agency, the adoption of this policy tool is clearly a global trend. Now, to reach the full potential of the forest sector, we also recommend that policymakers recognize that carbon emissions produced by construction and the carbon stored in the built environment. Like the case of low carbon fuel standards, flexible regulations could be implemented to measure that carbon and incentivize behavior to reduce emissions through smart material selection. Now, it's worth noting that a side benefit of this kind of policy applied to the Canadian built environment is that it could significantly expand the domestic market for Canadian solid wood. And this decreases the Canadian lumber industry's dependence on exports to the US. Given the softwood lumber dispute between Canada and the US is never going to end, a large Canadian market would be of considerable strategic value. And this is particularly important when we realize that the cornerstone, I really do mean this, the cornerstone of a competitive forest sector, especially in temperate climates like Canada, is a competitive solid wood sector. And that was a key conclusion that the 2008 Future Biopathways study, which I in fact led on behalf of the Forest Products of Canada, Government of Canada, and the provinces of Quebec, Ontario, and BC concluded. So in conclusion, part of Canada's forest sector has been hit hard by the COVID shock. However, opportunities do exist for a sustainable recovery to a lower carbon future, and the forest sector is really well positioned to punch above its weight. Having said that, a joint public and private sector effort is required to make this happen. So those are my comments. Happy to be here today and answer any questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Roberts. Ms. Rasmussen, how about you next?
Good morning, Tansei Atlanate. As introduced, my name is Tina Rasmussen. I'm a member of the Flying Dutch First Nation, and I'm Corporate Development and Administration Officer with MLTC Industrial Investments. Thank you for inviting MLTC to present today. The Meadow Lake Tribal Council, or MLTC, is located in Northwest Saskatchewan. Our traditional territory spans from central Saskatchewan to the Northwest Territory border on the western side of the province. We are made up of 9 First Nations, 4 of which are Dene speaking and 5 of which are Cree speaking. MLTCII is the incorporated economic development arm of the Tribal Council. Just going to give you a little bit of history about our organization. In 1988, the leadership of the Meadow Lake Tribal Council invested in a dimensional sawmill located in Meadow Lake, Saskatchewan. They understood the potential to raise the First Nations communities up through a local economic development opportunity using a local resource that grows on our traditional lands, and a huge opportunity to develop Indigenous employment in the forestry sector. Through the years of ownership, the chiefs remained diligent in their determination to create a world-class forestry operation. In 1998, they purchased the remaining shares in the company to make it 100% Indigenous owned. Today, the Tribal Council, through its Economic Development Corporation, MLTC Industrial Investments, we continue to operate the 100% Indigenous owned sawmill, North Sask Forest Products, which is a softwood lumber producer. North Sask produces 150 million board feet of dimensional lumber per year and has annual gross revenues of approximately $60 million. The lion's share of the lumber produced.
Yeah, Ms. Rasmussen, can I interrupt you for a second? There seems to be some problem with your microphone. There's a lot of static coming through.
Okay. Sorry.
No, it's still there.
Still there?
I don't know if
maybe unplug and plug it back in.
Okay, try that. Is that any better?
Yeah, much better actually.
Is it?
Yep,
Okay.
that's perfect. Thank you.
Just like the computer, plug and unplug, right?
Just give it a good kick.
Yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Right.
Sorry about that.
No problem.
So as I was saying, North Sask Forest Products was purchased by MLTC in 1998. North Sask produces 150 million board feet of dimensional lumber per year and has annual gross revenues of approximately $60 million. The lion's share of the lumber produced is sold into the U.S. market, and revenues earned are funneled back to the benefit of the 9 First Nation owner communities. In 2018, MLTC purchased L&M Wood Products, producer of pressure-treated wood posts and rails. It was felt that there was a significant need to ensure there was best use of timber that was being harvested from traditional lands. The addition of the L&M plant saw greater flexibility in the use of small diameter and oversized softwood that was not usable in the Norsask mill. The most recent entry into the pressure-treated wood products market sees an annual gross revenues of approximately $10 million and a sizable reduction in wasted timber. To ensure we have adequate timber supply to our plants, MLTC has a 30-year history with ownership in Mystic Management Limited, which is a woodlands administration company. Mystic has ensured stakeholder consultations, sustainability and controlled harvesting practices, as well as encouraging the development of Indigenous-owned forest harvesting and transport companies to ensure the raw material reaches the mill. The result of controlling our own forest management practices is that MLTC is the most senior Indigenous forest management and woodlands operator of a major forest tenure in the Canadian forest sector. Success and continued operation of our forest industries has not come without immense effort and tenacity. Norsask Forest Products is a survivor, having weathered the multi-year U.S. housing market collapse in the mid-2000s. We believe that Norsask is the only sawmill operation in Saskatchewan that did not shut down during the period from 2007 to 2012. Although many others shuttered, in some cases failed to reopen. In fact, upon reopening of markets, Norsask took steps to upgrade its finishing operation to make it more competitive and better able to meet market demands for planed lumber. In 2020, we face another challenge related to maintaining operations and safety of our personnel in the COVID era. We have continued operations through implementation of stringent safety protocols and by allowing for flexible staffing in the face of unplanned absences that may arise due to worker shortages complicated by COVID. As each and every industry, we do our best to continue to manage our business while keeping the best interests of our staff in mind. Today, MLTC has the largest and best known 100% Indigenous-owned forest products manufacturing companies and forest management company in Canada. Through the direct ownership of these industrial plants, MLTC has been able to encourage and support Indigenous business development related to the forestry industry. Today, there exist both timber harvesting and trucking companies that are Indigenous-owned and that employ many First Nations and Métis people in our region. A quote by Shane Burnett, Executive Director from the Ministry of Energy and Resources within the Government of Saskatchewan. He stated that Saskatchewan leads Canada and MLTC leads Saskatchewan by far when it comes to Indigenous forestry business development, Indigenous employment in the forestry sector, and percent of annual allowable cut allocated to Indigenous business. Federal and provincial statistics show that in Saskatchewan, 31% of the population employed in the forestry sector is Indigenous in comparison to overall 3% in Canada. Our major lumber exporting provinces, Alberta and British Columbia, operate with 7% and 5% Aboriginal employment participation in forestry, respectively. The results in Saskatchewan are accomplished through planned effort and direct focus on goals for moving a disadvantaged segment forward. In addition to the presence of a success story and industry influencer like Norsask Forest Products, Canada must focus on the need for Indigenous peoples to participate in the economy where they reside, rather than the natural resources leaving the region and no advantage being given to the Indigenous residents of the area. In many instances, non-local and even multinational corporations are moving their own interests forward without Indigenous participation. Prime Minister Trudeau has stated, and I quote, "No relationship is more important to me and to Canada than the one with Indigenous peoples. It is time for a renewed nation-to-nation relationship with Indigenous peoples based on recognition of rights, respect, cooperation, and partnership. If this is to be true, Canada must continue to implement effective measures and, where appropriate, special measures to ensure continuing improvement of the economic and social conditions of Indigenous communities, including new Indigenous ownership, growth, and diversification in the Canadian forestry sector." As
Ms.
there
Rasmussen, I'm going to have to ask you to wrap up very, very quickly, please.
Okay. The barriers that we see are Of course, as mentioned earlier, the continued tariffs, the American tariffs, most of our lumber is sold into the United States. We continue to see 20% tariffs. As a single sawmill operation, very difficult to endure. Something else that we see as a barrier is in order for Indigenous people to get into business, they need opportunities to access funding. Grant funding currently provided through for forestry opportunities is very targeted, lacks a lot of imagination and any type of flexibility to allow the communities, the First Nations communities, to participate.
Okay, I may have to stop you there. We have 5-minute limit on opening remarks, and we're running a bit short of time already. So perhaps.
Okay. The last thing I wanted to mention had to do with the new carbon, and this is a good news story, and I think it's something directly related to what the government is doing in the right direction. And this is MLTC has announced and is currently under construction of a new bioenergy cogeneration plant, and that cogeneration plant has been supported by a $52.5 million grant from both federal and provincial governments, and that is attached to North Sask Forest Products. So is a new way in this new bioenergy opportunity to create new opportunities, I guess, for our Aboriginal communities.
Right. Thank you very much. Okay. Mr. Bromley, over to you for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And on behalf of 14,000 members of the United Steelworkers in the forest industry across Canada, including over 80 members of my counterpart's operation in North Sask Forest Products up in Meadow Lake, Saskatchewan, I want to thank you for the opportunity to the committee to inviting us to contribute to your important work on the economic recovery of this critical and historic sector in Canada's economy. My name is Jeff Bromley, and I am the chair of the United Steelworkers Wood Council. It is a council of over 12 locals across the nation, as I mentioned, representing 14,000 workers in the sector. I am a worker. I have been a representative of members both in the Kootenays and now nationally with the United Steelworkers for the past 8 years. And the first 18 years, I was a worker within a sawmill in southeastern British Columbia that's still is there to this day. I have to say, though, the last few years of the last 26 years I've been in this industry have been some of the most turbulent to our industry and most impactful to workers in the forest industry. The forest industry remains very important, obviously, to Canada's economy, the community it supports, and the cultural fabric and history of our country. In total, employs almost 210,000 Canadians across Canada. It directly contributes directly contributed $23 billion to Canada's GDP in 2019. More than 600 communities rely on the forest industry, and about 300 of those rely on forestry for almost 50% of their household income. About 160 are solely reliant on forestry, and much of that in the more rural sectors of our country. Our industry is increasingly under pressure from the U.S. softwood duties, forces of nature such as the pine beetles and the epidemics and the forest fires, fiber access issues, and producer cash liquidity issues. The sector exported over $36 billion of forest products globally. 68% of those exports are and usually destined to the United States. To date, Canada has paid approximately $4.6 billion in softwood duties since 2017, when the devastating duties were implemented upon expiry of the last softwood lumber agreement. 2.4 billion of that 4.6 billion was from British Columbia, 500 million from Ontario, 800 million from Quebec, and the balance from the rest of the nation. Since 2017, the job loss has been extensive. Almost 11,000 jobs have been lost industry-wide, and over 1,000 USW jobs, particularly in 8 operations in British Columbia alone. There's been a 15% decrease in market access to the US since the implementation of those duties. But that gap hasn't gone away. It's not a vacuum. That gap's been filled tariff-free by European nations. Despite these challenges, the forest industry has a bright future in Canada. It just needs the federal government to help us get through this tough and difficult time. The world still needs wood products. We just need help to address these unfair duties, reducing our competitiveness. The future in the forest industry, products such as cross-laminated timber, CLT, and mass timber show very good potential for value-added manufacturing. As opposed to concrete, construction with wood is a carbon net benefit to the planet, acting as a carbon sink while forests are replenished following harvest by reforestation. As the election results in the US are finalized, it's time for Canada to focus on ending the softwood lumber dispute. Our Canadian industry needs a fair trade deal to provide certainty for industry, certainty for workers, and the communities in which they live. Now, for different reasons, a change in the US administration is also time to make permanent reforms to employment insurance, reforms for forestry workers and indeed all workers. Our written submission goes into much more detail, but the key points are of the severance packages for those laid off workers from closures, vacation entitlements for those that want to access their vacation pay during a layoff period should not be impacted by EI, or they should not impact or provide a barrier for their access to EI. Eligible hours must be lowered to allow for second EI claims in an industry that experienced extreme peaks and valleys. These initiatives, although approved by our current government on a temporary one-year basis, need to be made permanent. Canada also needs to be prepared to provide loan guarantees to companies who have paid duties. As a part of a sustainable economic strategy, loan guarantees to forest companies must be made available equaling 75% of the amount they have paid in duties. Despite recent increases and in the success of larger forest product companies, many small mills are still suffering from weak cash flow. However, I must clarify that any government support in this regard must be contingent upon supporting Canadian workers in Canadian communities. While the duties that are earned from the lumber manufacturers and paid by the lumber manufacturers, support from the Canadian government must, in the interim, must not enable multinational companies to invest any support anywhere else but in Canada and the provinces and communities they reside in. That concludes my remarks, but I'm happy to happy to answer any questions you have, and I also encourage the members of the committee to visit our campaign website, forestryisforeveryone.ca. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much, Mr. Bromley. Okay, first up is somebody from the Conservatives, and I don't.
Yeah, I got it.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'm going to begin with Tina Rasmussen here. It's always great to see a fellow Saskatchewanian in committee. So thank you for being here, and thank you to the other people for joining us as well. Mr. Rasmussen, you said, I just kind of want to touch on a few points here. Your tribal council has a diversifying industry. It owns companies which deal with different kinds of energy, ranging from biomass to oil delivery. This committee is taking a closer look at forestry, obviously, so I'd like you to tell us how your forestry sector's economic output and employment levels compare to your other types of energy development.
Well, obviously, MLTC. Oh, that a little bit better. MLTC has owned North Sask Forest Products probably the longest out of most of its companies and is the most developed in our organization. So of course is the most organized and provides the best outputs for our communities in terms of employment, development. I was saying in my statement, we've had the opportunity to take a byproduct of the sawmill and turn it into a new development project in the whole bioenergy field in terms of a cogeneration plant where we're feeding 6.6 megawatts of energy directly into the Sask Power grid from hog fuel waste currently being burnt in a 50-year-old beehive burner at North Sask. So to answer your question, we are finding that the forestry industry has created multitude amounts of gains for our MLTC in comparison to any of our other corporations in any other type of, whether it's oil and gas or any other type of industry.
With COVID restrictions, there have been years of softwood lumber disputes with the U.S. Back in February, in his remarks for the International Trade Committee, your colleague Al Beliski, as president of Industrial Investments, described the situation as a softwood lumber lack of agreement. He also noted the federal government is uniquely responsible for resolving these disputes and negotiating deals. So has this situation changed for you at all since February?
No, absolutely it has not. We continue to suffer the impacts. Many larger corporations have diversified their portfolios by opening up plants in the U.S., thereby avoiding those tariffs. But with a small single corporation like North Sask Forest Products, MLTC, we only have one plant, so we feel the full brunt of those tariffs. I think the last numbers provided by our general manager was somewhere in the neighborhood of $14 million loss in revenue in since 2017. Due to the tariffs, I mean.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's a pretty substantial impact. Like what community and social impacts does that have for the First Nations who are part of the Meadow Lake Tribal Council?
Well, like any other First Nation, for any other First Nations Economic Development Corporation, our goal is to provide revenue back to our home communities. In our home communities, all of that revenue is used to support education, healthcare, economic development at a local level, improvement to services. So every dollar that we're not able to keep and able to process and bring back to those home communities directly impacts those communities and the level of service in them. The chiefs and their councils make the decisions in regards to what is developed on reserve, but they hire and they invest in economic development opportunities in order to create those opportunities for their community or to create those benefits back to their home communities. So huge impact directly to communities.
Yeah, absolutely. Has there been any concern about the workforce being shifted from forestry into the other sectors that you guys provide employment for? Like, are you losing workers in forestry because of these tariffs? Is that a concern?
No, we've managed to, at North Sask, been very tenacious and managed to stay afloat. It is our main focus and our largest employer. Sorry, I'm hearing a lot of reverberation as well. Our largest employer in Northern Saskatchewan. And I mean, I don't know how many of you have ever visited Northern Saskatchewan, but we're very remote and isolated and very sparsely populated. So the forestry industry creates an opportunity where the people live. The trees grow where we live. They don't grow in the prairies in southern Saskatchewan. They grow up in northern Saskatchewan where we live. So it's taking advantage of a natural resource that grows in our communities. Now, the opportunity that's been created by North Sask Forest Products is that the First Nations have influence. It is not non-Aboriginal or multinational or companies from southern Saskatchewan or Alberta or BC that are coming in and providing harvesting or providing trucking. It is an opportunity for us to create these opportunities in our own backyard based on our own natural resources. So I don't think that there's going to be a big move away from forestry. I think if anything, we're looking for, in the case of the Bioenergy Center, in ways in which to create more synergies with the forestry sector.
Thanks, Ms. Rasmussen. That's all your time. Mr. Lefebvre, over to you for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you all the panelists for coming today. I had also questions for Mr. Rasmussen, but I'll maybe let my other colleagues ask those. And maybe Mr. Roberts, a few things that you mentioned about the potential about certainly what we need to do as we go forward. And you talk about two things: a flexible regulation, and certainly you talked also about the solid wood sector. So let's maybe talk about the first one. And you talk about certainly the compliance and the credit trading, but and then you mentioned also the clean fuel standards we have in Canada. So I'd like to, from your perspective, right, as we move forward with regulation, you've obviously done a lot of studies internationally as well. I've obviously worked with it with New Zealand, so I'm assuming that you've done a lot of comparative analysis of what's going on in the world. So why is this? Why do you think that this is important that Canada continues down this path with the clean fuel standards? And what are the opportunities, certainly for the bioeconomy, because of this, of these regulations?
Yeah, good question. You know, what's the good news? We're not in this alone. The global forest sector is going into some real challenges. And I would think right now, particularly in the temperate climates, whether it's Northern Europe or Canada or Russia for that matter, you know, one of our challenges is that there's some structural changes occurring. You know, the paper and pulp industry are, you know, the paper industry in particular is going south. There's nothing we can do about it. It's technologically driven. And that's the primary use of the lower quality biomass that we produce. The good stuff we can put into lumber. And if we can get into the US market, that's great. But we need to get a way to get value out of the lower quality. And that's where this focus, at least a lot of our emphasis, and a lot of the people are focusing on that, is that what can you create value out of the low quality stuff? A lot is going into energy. We're hearing this, you know, in Meadow Lake. Now that's electricity. Well, that's good in some areas, but unfortunately, it's also relatively low valued energy. It doesn't create a lot of jobs and it doesn't create a lot of value and revenue, but it's good in some situations. We need to create other ways to do it. Our challenge is that in the whole energy and chemical space, we're competing with very low cost fossil fuels. That's just where the market is. And it's going to stay that way in our view. And so we need a way to say, okay, well, how do you then close that gap in terms of and put a value on carbon? That's really the issue. How do you put a value on carbon? And this way, and you know, we talk about, you know, carbon prices. Yeah, that's one way. But reality, everywhere in the world, there's a political limit in what you can do on an economy-wide carbon price. $50, not sure. But, no. You know, but the reality is it's not strong enough. And so what we're finding is that by putting in these flexible regulations where you can target big emitting sectors and then put in these trading systems, you can really send a strong enough price signal to get steel in the ground here. And that's what we have to do, is get steel in the ground. And I can tell you, and I gave the example of this joint venture that's Canfor is looking at with their RBS joint venture in Prince George. That would not be occurring in Canada, period, if it were not for the BC low carbon fuel standard. I can tell you.
Yep. And that's so basically, so these are creating certainly business opportunities for the private sector as well.
Oh, absolutely. It is. And it's a way to diversify what we're doing with our God-given advantage of a lot of biomass.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, there was a theme that came out in all three presentations, and that was the softwood lumber agreement. And I tied to that as well, you know. And so by doing this and expanding, key is putting what is the value for carbon in our buildings. Right now, we don't recognize it. But by looking at this, expanding this concept to the built environment, we really could expand well beyond the residential sector and get a good alternative in Canada. Because as I said before, regardless of whether we like it, we've had the softwood lumber agreement both under Liberal and Conservative governments in Canada, Democrat and Republican in the States. This ain't going away. So we have to find a way to look at alternatives.
Agreed. Maybe to Mr. Bromley, you talked about certainly the value-added products that we're seeing now, certainly the importance, and I think that's what Dr. Roberts, Mr. Roberts was also mentioning. But certainly some people out there will say, well, value-added products, are we going away from our traditional sector? Are we going to lose jobs from this? So it's important. So I was pleased to hear you, and I want to hear more from your perspective on the jobs created the possibility or the potential of these value-added products of the solid wood and the possibility of the biomass and the bioenergy. And then what would that mean for your members and that potential for jobs?
For in terms of the softwood lumber and finalizing that, and to my counterpart, Mr. Roberts' comments, you're right. It's not going away. It's to the point where there are pundits and commentators that now, I believe, accurately characterize the billions in dollars of duties as a dividend for those southern producers that have so much influence in Washington. And I actually take affront to that they can actually take revenue from our country and our industry and classify that as a dividend. So that aside, to your question though, so we do need that is the basis. The solid wood sector is not going anyway. Is it eroded somewhat? Yes, it does. It doesn't evolve, obviously, but that base needs to be there. There needs to have that solid wood sector base where the 65 to 68% of our products go into the U.S. That needs to happen, or else we don't have the residual products that a lot of our industry, that the whole industry does rely on. To your point about the next generation of products, of value-added products, the CLT, the cross-laminated timber and mass timber, I think it's a massive market. We have members in Penticton in Structurelam. It's a company called Structurelam that employs I believe almost 300 members. I think it's 275 now in Penticton, and they're still looking for more workers because the product it's labor intensive, but it's the demand for it is strong.
Thank you, Mr. Bromley. I'm going to have to interrupt you and stop you there, unfortunately. Ms. Michaud, you are next for 6 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je vais m'adresser.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will be speaking to Mr. Bromley as well. You mentioned that over the past few years have been quite turbulent for the industry. There were many job lost. You also met my colleague, Mr. Simard, regarding the awareness campaign that you're conducting right now. There are many demands made in terms of EI. Now, in terms of that, what do you think the federal government should do to ensure better working conditions for workers in the industry?
Thank you for your question. So in terms of particulars, as I mentioned in our campaign, EI supports. One thing is what is predictable as the weather is the lumber industry. That it is very cyclical. It is very peaks and valleys. That's just an unfortunate nature of the beast. And we do have these layoffs and we do have these closures, but it's important for the base supports of workers, the employment insurance system, which the employers, the workers, we all pay into, that they are not barriers for when workers need these at their most. And any benefits that are negotiated or provided shouldn't be barriers to access to the EI. And I believe the federal government's on the right track. I believe that with the measures that they've instituted on a temporary basis, but as we said in my opening remarks and presentation, that making those access to EI permanent when you are in fact laid off and or suffer a closure is paramount. So in terms of making what the federal government's position is, or what they should do to continue to help, I think that all of the aspects, making sure that there's a fair trade environment, making sure that there's a competitive tax environment, making sure that there's support for workers. I think that those things are paramount to make sure that that the industry is both vibrant and thrives into the future. But it's going to take some work, and all the things that we've talked about today about other products based out of from the forest. We talk about a BC about what we can get more value out of the timber that's in the forest in terms of that there's nothing left behind, that everything is extracted and used for different products. So I think that those kind of programs are important to make sure that the industry thrives.
Merci. Et ce support.
Thank you. And this support for industry can be financial support. We know that from 2017 to 2020, the federal government invested about $20 billion in the petroleum sector, whereas within the forestry sector, we only saw about 70 million and maybe just a bit more for the forestry sector, and 70% was in the form of loans. What could the federal government do? What role can it play to support the industry during the energy transition, especially for guaranteed loans support for research. We have a great research sector in Quebec. I think we could make it work for the forestry industry. What could the government do? What should it do to allow for this kind of investment?
And I think that's a good segue into the topic that we've been leading in terms of there is that value in terms of those tariffs that are out there that we sincerely believe that at some point there's going to be a deal. There's going to be a measure of those duties that they've paid. My counterpart, Mr. Rasmussen, mentioned that North South Forest Products has paid. They're a relatively small company. They paid a monumental amount of money in terms of $14 million that could go back into reinvestment into their communities. It could go back to the workers. It could go back to make the company a more competitive operation. That amount of money, that capital that's out there, if we could have the federal government play a role in ensuring that smaller operations have access, and indeed you'd have to be fair to offer it to all operations, but the bigger players have to be restricted in terms of what they invest in. I don't think they should be able to take advantage of federal government programs to further investment in the U.S. South, let's say, as they did last time after the beginning of the 06-07 Softwood Agreement, when they got the money back and they then invested abroad into other markets. I don't think that benefits Canadian workers or communities in any way, shape, or form. So I think that a robust and investment or a loans program by the federal government to the industry based on those duties would go a long way to helping especially these smaller players, because as much as we talk about the Canfors and the West Frasers and the Resolutes, the bigger players in the industry, there still are the so-called mom and pop industries, the smaller players that do employ 30 to 40 to 80 workers and at good paying jobs, and those smaller industries need our support and need the federal government support. And I think that this initiative will go a long way in helping us.
30 seconds.
Oh, bon, ben, on parle...
Okay, well, we didn't hear as much about the secondary products, the secondary, tertiary processing, for example. Could those products play a role in relaunching the economy in this sector? We're talking a lot about how to continue on after the pandemic. Perhaps these products could help with the recovery.
Oh, I agree. And I don't think that any restriction, the problem that we'll find, though, it'll be fiber availability and then making the best use of that fiber, though. But it's a good point.
All right, we'll stop there. Mr. Backrack, over to you for 6 minutes.
Mr. Chair, perhaps I'll pick up where my colleague just left off on the topic of value added and ask Mr. Bromley. You mentioned cross-laminated timbers, and that's a product I have some knowledge of. When we're talking about these kinds of value-added products, I'm wondering, looking at other jurisdictions in the world that are leading in the development and manufacturing of those kinds of value-added products, are there any particular jurisdictions that you look to for policy ideas or incentives that we should be incorporating here in Canada?
I don't know if I have any. Oh, wait for the echo. Thank you. Thanks, Taylor. I don't know that if I have any particular jurisdictions that I know they do some good stuff into Europe, but I still believe firmly that that Canada is the leader, or certainly one of the leaders in value-added product manufacturing, specifically on the mass timber and CLT front. And I think that I truly believe that if the timber side of the equation wasn't so restricted or so tightened in terms of supply, it really to try and take a piece of that supply part of the equation that isn't occupied by the solid wood sector is difficult. The bigger players, to my knowledge, aren't as involved in the CLT portion of yet, and they haven't jumped wholeheartedly into it because the timber supply situation is so tight. And so that is a dynamic that needs to be, I think, through regulation, through incentive, through government incentive. I know that because a lot of the jurisdictions have different control or different way they control the land base in terms of tenure and access to the forest. It would be, you have to enable the supply to give them the ability to look into these products such as CLT. So I think that that's where the federal government plays a strong role in conjunction with the provincial governments is trying to measure out if there's ability for reallocation of tenure to these companies that are innovative and do provide access or the ability to provide these mass products or these mass timber products that are value added, that provide more value to our sector, provide more jobs, and obviously sink more carbon into using them for bit. We can use the CLT. We know that there's building codes that are now up to 12 stories and higher. The product, there is a real demand for this product that we could take advantage of through proper regulation.
Thanks, Mr. Bromley. My next question is for Mr. Roberts. Mr. Roberts, you talked about carbon sequestration through use of wood as a construction product. And I know in British Columbia in particular, there have been wood first policies for a number of years now. I wonder if you could speak to the efficacy of those policies. Have we seen a really measurable increase in the use of wood as a building product in the construction sector? And to what magnitude has that occurred?
So in terms of the direction, right direction, so it has been effective. We've seen a number of good examples. I would say Canada has been second in the field there. This was really developed out of Scandinavia initially, and Stora Enso, the Swedish company, is the biggest in the world in this. We have that the wood first policy has been good. Let me say something controversial here. Someone is that I would argue that let's focus on what we care about. What do we care about is reducing the carbon and getting economic activity. And so it's worthwhile to sort of set a target and then let, again, the private sector figure out how to do that. A wood first policy says we've got to use wood. Well, tell that to the steel and concrete folks. They also have ways to be innovative here. And for example, you can create concrete by storing CO2 in it. So what I would say is that the people who are looking at true innovation are saying, let's widen the door, set a target. We want to reduce the carbon intensity and then go at it, folks. And I think the CLT is a great alternative. But you'll also see other people try to use other products, other innovations as well, so that we can get a race to the top here in terms of what we really want. And I think a flexible regulation is more effective for the economy wide than just a wood first policy. So that sounds probably blasphemy for the forest sector, which I work in, but I'm just saying, what do we care about? And I'm saying end result. The other thing to note here, so it has been effective. We are seeing it, the construction especially happening in Sweden and Finland right now. As I've mentioned, the work we're doing with the government of New Zealand, this is going to be one of their focal points. Put a value on stored carbon in construction. That's their target. The good news is that there's also other things we can do in this whole construction area. For example, wood insulation. We're seeing some really interesting technologies out of Germany, the Diefenbacher and the Simple Comp technologies, which you can use for the lower quality. And that's key, getting good demand for our low quality wood, which still comes out of our sawmills. You put 50% of your saw log typically goes to lumber. The other 50% we've got to find a home for that has some value. And that's a challenge when you don't have a strong new paper or pulp industry. This is where some of these new value-added products are going to come in.
Thanks, Mr. Backrack. I'm going to stop you there. Okay, we're moving into the 5-minute round. We got time for 2 more. So the Conservatives are next. I don't know. I don't see Ms. Harder. You've got your hand up. Okay, you've got 5 minutes.
Awesome. Thank you, Chair. My question goes to MLTC. Now, you talked a lot about the benefit, of course, that forestry and other industries, but forestry in particular is having for Indigenous communities. Now, about 6% of participation is from or Indigenous folks participated at a rate of about 6%, which is very cool. You talked about investment being made in healthcare, into housing, into infrastructure, which is huge for Indigenous communities. Reading through your website, it looks like you folks are doing some tremendous work in terms of the benefit that is being added. Now, my question is this: with the imposition of a clean fuel standard, that is going to result in a significant cut to profit. Now, of course, some of that expense can be passed down to the consumer, but I would imagine that as the producer, you're going to have to take on some of that cost. What impact is that going to have on the benefits then that are being offered to Indigenous communities?
In the same instance as the tariff, it's going to impact directly on the communities. It's going to mean that much less money that's going directly back to our stakeholders, to our shareholders, to our member communities. We're making every effort that we can in order to try and look at all those potential new ideas, new options, new ways that we might create opportunity to diversify and create things that might reduce that impact on us. I think somebody else mentioned it as well. There's somebody mentioned concrete with the new facility that we're building with the Bioenergy Center. I mean, as Aboriginal people, it's important for us to move the tree from the forest directly through to the end of its life and leave no waste. So for us, the Bioenergy Center means all of that waste that's currently just being burnt and expelled into the air as smoke and ash will now go through a bioenergy facility. But even more than that, we're investigating with the concrete industry what is the opportunity to create another byproduct in terms of the fly ash that comes out of that bioenergy facility. Now, all of those things are going to be created in a renewable manner with a renewable fuel. So are going to help to reduce how much effect is put on us. So at MLTC, we're looking for every opportunity that there is to move into the bioenergy or into the renewable energy markets. As I said before, difficult though when you are a one of a one, and very much an area where we need the government's support, and especially as Indigenous people when we are really starting to begin to move into the economic development, kind of coming into our own for some communities, definitely in need of government support in those areas.
Very good. Perhaps you could comment further on the impact that foreign investments or foreign purchases is having on the industry. Would you have a comment to make with regard to that?
I'm probably not the best one to comment on that because I don't, work directly with North Sask Forest Products, but just in general, I mean, it makes it more difficult for us to ride the ebbs and flows of the market when it comes to if you've got a multinational company that has investments in the United States, it's not paying tariffs on a portion of its material that it's producing. Whereas for us, 100% of everything that we sell into the United States has tariff on it. So I think the ebb and flow is not quite as good for us as it might be for a larger corporation that's able to have their companies spread over 2 countries.
Sure. Lastly, could you just provide a brief comment with regards to the opportunities for autonomy that the forestry industry and other natural resource industries offer you as Indigenous communities?
Oh, that's a huge one. I mean, for us, I mean, 31% of the people working in the forestry industry are either First Nations or Métis. I mean, that's 31%. The number of people, families that's impacting is tremendous, and that includes the people that are working in the harvesting companies, that are working in the trucking companies. It's just the forestry industry in northern Saskatchewan and the ability for MLTC to participate in that has created a pathway for First Nations communities. We have 2 First Nations communities, Canoe Lake and Waterhen Lake. Both have very large, very, very large timber harvesting corporations and run their own trucking companies. That wouldn't have happened, I don't believe, if it would have been a multinational that owned North Sask Forest Products and was running that. We have in our own sawmill here, I think it's about 38% of our population working in the sawmill here are Aboriginal. So we can't influence those things. As an Aboriginal company, as an Aboriginal shareholder owning a company, we have direct influence over those things. So you know, we're able to make tremendous strides. Even the new bioenergy facility, we've got what the heck is it? It's about.
I'm going to have to ask you to
Sorry.
wrap up again. I
Yeah.
apologize for interrupting, but that's really my job
Sorry.
here. So
Thanks,
Ms. Harder. Mr. Sidhu, you're the last up in this round. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to our guests, Mr. Roberts, Mr. Rasmussen, and Mr. Bromley for taking the time to be with us today. My question, I know, I'm sorry, Mr. Rasmussen, you keep getting cut off, but I know you briefly mentioned the Bioenergy Center in your remarks. I was hoping to hear more about the Bioenergy Center that is currently under construction. I understand you may be nearing completion within a year's time, and that federal funding has been accounted for more than half of the total project cost. So $52 million has accounted for more than half of your total project cost. Can you please tell us more about this bioenergy center, the types of technologies that are being deployed here, the economic potential the center represents not only for your 9 members, First Nation communities, but also for Canadians?
Yes, the Bioenergy Center, yes, will be completed by probably December of 2021. I invite you to check it out. You can watch it completely go up online at www.mltcbioenergy.ca. Yes, the government contributed $52.5 million, and quite frankly, if they hadn't contributed, that equates to about 75% of the overall cost of construction of this facility. And quite frankly, if they hadn't contributed that, there would be no facility. There are not enough dollars in the coffers of MLTC and in our First Nations communities to be able to take on this type of endeavor. And as most of you, and most in particular Mr. Roberts, will attest to, the sale of energy is very low cost and has very little return. We're actually only at the end of the day going to end up probably returning about $750,000 to our 9 First Nations communities. So the revenue is not a lot. But to us as First Nations people, it's important to see that timber product from the beginning to the end and to get the absolute most use and most revenue and most jobs as we can out of that product. I'm sorry, I kind of missed what else you wanted to know about the Energy Center.
I wanted to know, I know it's a very impressive project. I mean, do you see potential for future projects similar to Bioenergy Center for other Indigenous communities?
I think it's you know, we would hold it up as an opportunity for all Indigenous communities. But the issue is, as I said earlier, how do you afford to do it? It's not something, I mean, it's selling the energy. It doesn't make it economically viable. It has to be something that is supported, you know, by governments. This went through a grant process. We received $52 million, and as I said, it wouldn't have happened if we didn't receive that, just simply because these projects are not economically viable on their own, you know, and that I think is something as Canadians we really need to work on, and as a government we really need to focus on ensuring that if this is the way that we are going, that we're supporting this.
Thank you, Mr. Susan. Powering homes with greener energy is definitely critical. We've heard that NRCan's Indigenous Forestry Initiative has been widely popular and is often oversubscribed. It is a program that provides financial support for Indigenous-led economic development projects in the forestry sector. Have you been able to take advantage of this program, and what type of feedback for the program would you have going forward?
Yes, we have. We actually are currently using the grant program to the tune of about $3.4 million. So for North Sask Forest Products, it has been very, very, very helpful. But I think if you actually look at the program itself, a lot of the Aboriginal communities or Indigenous groups that have been accessing it are for relatively minor amounts of money. So the grant program, although helpful, is more on doing studies and gaining better understanding of land use, and a lot less about building infrastructure and about creating economic development. So I would say if you have, if there was anything that I would say about it, is that I think it really is definitely a needed program, but really needs to have more flexibility added to it in terms of what it is that the revenue and that the grant program is actually used for. And maybe looking at the amounts of money. I mean, this is not an industry that takes a little bit of money to get into, even when you're talking about new potential.
Appreciate it. No, thank you so much, Mr. Rasmussen. You were very,
Mr.
very
Mr. Sidhu, rather than me having to interrupt witnesses again, I'm going to interrupt you this time. I think that's all the time we have in this round. So, thank you.
Est-ce que j'aurai le temps pour une petite question, Monsieur le Président, courte, très courte?
Would I have time for a very short question, Mr. Chairman?
Ready to account for the technical difficulties we had at the beginning, and we do have a second panel waiting, so we really are beyond our time. So unfortunately, we're going to have to move into the next hour. I apologize for that, but we are somewhat limited. We have some time at the end, which we'll make up in the next panel, but I'd like to thank these three witnesses for joining us today. Really appreciate you taking the time and your contribution today. So we will suspend for 2 minutes and allow time to get the next panel ready. Thank you.
Thank you all for the opportunity.
So welcome back. I want to welcome our three new witnesses. Thank you for joining us today. The Alberta Forest Products Association, Jason Cripps, that's from the British Columbia Council of Forest Industries, Susan Yurkovic, and from the Quebec Export Bureau, Sylvain Labbé. So thank you, three of you, for taking the time to be here. I'm going to give each of you up to 5 minutes to deliver opening remarks. Then I will open the floor to questions from around the table. You're free to speak in either official language. Translation services are available. I will warn you in advance, my job is to be the chief interrupter. So if people go on longer than they're supposed to, I will be rude and interrupt and kindly ask you to wrap things up. So on that note, I will go in order of your names on the schedule. So Mr. Cripps, why don't you start? Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Chair and committee members. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much.
In the forest industry, we're proud of the work that we do and the products that we make. Forestry is vitally important for our lives, whether it's building materials for our safe place to live, whether it's pulp for essential services and products like PPE, laboratory filters, and food packaging, and sustainable energy to keep the lights on in the cold Canadian winter, even in cloudy Vancouver. I'd like to add that a secure and sustainable livelihood for 230,000 Canadians who work in our industry, not to mention the additional 370,000 Canadians whose jobs are created by our economic activity. That's 600,000 jobs total, jobs dependent on forestry in Canada. And people can feel good about those products and jobs. They're contributing to the management of the most sustainable forest resource in the world, a resource that's part of the solution for our climate change and a vehicle to get us to net zero. In terms of the economic side, our forest industry is key to the recovery right across the country. But in Alberta, it's even more acute. We've seen our economy decimated by the downturn in the energy industry. Rural communities have been hit especially hard, with many resource jobs disappearing. Forestry communities, though, have fared much better. Our industry supports 40,000 jobs throughout the province, and they're stable, well-paying jobs. For many families, forestry has been a harbor in the storm. Our industry is stable, but we do have real needs to maintain our vibrant future. First, I'd like to look at the positive steps. I think that governments, both federally and provincially, have taken positive steps for forestry in Alberta, and indeed right across Canada. Minister O'Regan announced nearly $70 million to support pine beetle control work in Alberta. This work is absolutely essential to the forest health nationwide. And I know that Ms. Yurkovic and our colleagues in British Columbia know all too well the destruction of the mountain pine beetle from both an environmental and economic perspective. By helping us to hold the line in Alberta, you're helping to prevent the destruction that is occurring in forest communities across this country. We really want to acknowledge Minister O'Regan and his excellent department officials at Natural Resources Canada for this important funding. Secondly, we are appreciative of the Government of Canada's recognition that forestry is part of the solution on climate change. We are encouraged that the throne speech identifies foresters as the key personnel in this fight and committed to planting 2 billion trees. We will partner with you on these initiatives every step of the way. On the need side, the first and most pressing item for our industry is to maintain access to the land base. Without that land base and a stable supply of wood, nothing happens in the forest. Investments don't happen, jobs don't get created, and products that the world needs won't get manufactured. One of the real challenges to maintain that access and those jobs is the Species at Risk Act. This is a prescriptive piece of legislation that often calls for drastic steps. The real challenge is that there doesn't seem to be present of a 30,000-foot approach. One day, you're forced to take drastic measures that helps one species, but may not be beneficial to another. A year later, a different species comes up for review, and a whole different set of measures are on the table. It's a tunnel vision approach, and for our industry, it's really damaging. It's difficult to know where we're going, and many of the measures restrict access to the land base. It's difficult to make investments and plan for growth. We need an approach that looks at the land base and our species holistically, and drives towards a broader goal of healthy landscapes and forests that support a diversity of species. It's time to end the prescriptive one-off approach. and move to something more sustainable for both environment and our economy. It's time to consider overhauling the Species at Risk Act and transitioning to a multi-species approach. As it relates to a working forest, it's also time for a firm commitment to a working forest. By that, I mean forests that are managed collaboratively by government, communities, and foresters. We need to recognize that sterilizing our land base by excluding forestry and other resource industries is not a tenable solution. It will lead to unhealthy landscapes that are susceptible to forest fires and pest infestations. These events will not support species biodiversity and will harm recovery efforts. It will also hurt communities and undermine Canada's economic recovery. And it will take the greatest tool in the fight against climate change out of our hands. That tool is sustainably managed forests. We know that forests that are carefully planned and managed through harvesting and replanting are much more effective carbon sinks than those that are left untouched. Harvesting older forests and sequestering carbon in our homes, buildings, and products that we use every day allow for planting of new forests. These new forests capture carbon as they grow, and that growth and sequestration is the best way to achieve our net zero goals. By committing to a working forest, we're doing the right thing for our communities. We're doing the right thing for our economy, and we're doing the right thing for our planet. Thank you very much for your time and attention this afternoon.
Thank you very much, sir. That's right on time. Ms. Yurkovich, maybe you can go next.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. We appreciate the opportunity to be here this morning or this afternoon. And while much uncertainty remains as to the health and economic crisis, what it holds for Canadians in the month ahead, what is certain from our perspective is that the forest industry, like industry here in British Columbia, like across Canada, is well positioned to help Canadians get back to work, to lift communities up, and to deliver low carbon products that the world wants. The pandemic that initially forced mill shutdowns, but operators were able to put safe work practices in place and get back up and running much quicker than consumer-facing industries. And strong demand fueled by home renovations and rising housing starts also helped, allowing many families to get back up on their feet and demonstrating how our sector's deep roots and resilient supply chain are critical to our collective economic recovery. Like Jason said, BC's forest industry has a huge economic input here. It accounts for a third of BC's exports. It's $13 billion in GDP, about $4 billion in taxes annually that fund important health and social services. And in 2019, our companies at Kofi purchased $7 billion worth of goods and services from 10,000 suppliers in 340 communities across our province. And while many people will think of that as just being rural and remote communities, it'll be interesting to know that Vancouver had the highest spend for the forest sector last year. All this to say is that our industry is a cornerstone of the is going to be the cornerstone of the economy, and it's critical to our economic recovery, whether you are in Prince George, Campbell River, Victoria, or Surrey. But while we have weathered this crisis in the short term relatively well, we do face foundational challenges that predate the pandemic, including rising costs, regulatory complexity, trade volatility, and growing global competition. So as your committee here today considers the important role that our sector can play in our collective economic recovery, we'd urge you to focus on the following 5 key actions. First, as Jason said, it's critically important that we invest in and protect our working forest land base. In British Columbia, about 52% of the land base has some form of conservation value on it. That's a huge commitment. It makes BC a great place to work, and it's a model for sustainable development. But in addition to the conservation values, we also value our renewable forest resource for the jobs and opportunities it provides to families and communities. And secure access to fiber at a reasonable cost is the single biggest factor that can help attract new investment and contribute to economic recovery. And that's why we think just like parks and protected areas, we should decide on the size of the working forest and then lock it in. And once we've done that, we need to explore innovative ways to manage the forest resource. We are already an industry leader in terms of forest certification. We're employing new technologies, and we're ready to roll up our sleeves on the 2 billion tree initiative. But managing in a world of climate change is going to require us all to take a fresh look. And there are new ideas. that can need to be explored to improve the health of our forests, our industry, our communities, and our country. Second, we want to have good rules that protect our environment, but right now forestry in BC is governed by close to 60 federal and provincial legislative statutes and regulations, layers of complexity that create uncertainty, add costs, and impair our ability to compete. We need to increase coordination and eliminate redundancies without jeopardizing environmental protection, and we'd welcome the opportunity to work collaboratively to make changes where it makes sense. Third critical priority is our partnership with First Nations. In BC today, we have 5,300 Indigenous people who are directly employed in our sector, with many more in B2B relationships, joint ventures, forest management, etc. And we're very proud of the relationships established over many years, but we know there's a lot more work to do. And as we work towards reconciliation and the implementation of the UN Declaration, it's critical that we do this work together to make sure we get it right, to make sure the outcomes are clear, and to make sure that we create the conditions where all can prosper. Fourth, as we look to the future, we need to double down on both market and product diversification. Over the last couple of decades, working with the provinces and the federal governments, BC's led the charge to expand our markets, particularly into Asia, where we now sell 30% of our products, and that reduces our reliance on the US, where we continue to face punishing tariffs. And our partnership with NRCan really can be seen as a gold standard on how to create partnerships and get results. But developing new markets and products is not a short-term game. It requires years to develop product familiarity, codes, standards, and market acceptance. And so we believe that must continue. And finally, we would say that the time is absolutely right to aggressively build on our reputation as a green leader, a world leader in building with wood. There are incredible examples of low carbon wood construction across our country. We have people, we have the resources, we have the know-how, and we have the ability to lead the world. We can be the place the world looks to for the next big idea on how to use the resources that come from the forest in a way that has a lighter climate impact. We need to pursue opportunities to grow demand for our homegrown products, incent the development of mass timber, help builders navigate the building code, and create more awareness about the incredible benefits of building with wood. And by doing that, we'll also create new kinds of jobs for the next generation of forest workers, which is something I think we're all excited about. There's a big task ahead for you all. Lifting our economy up after this unprecedented blow will be hard, but the forest industry can and will play a significant role, and you can help magnify that positive impact by helping to address some of the fundamental challenges we face, and importantly, by championing this industry as we work to leverage our low carbon forest products as a climate change solution for the world. Thank you, and I look forward to the questions.
Thank you very much. Mr. Labbé, over to you for 5 minutes, please. You're on mute, sir. There you go.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Alors, merci au
Thank you for the Standing Committee for this invitation to speak about the economic recovery. The Quebec Wood Export Bureau of Quebec represents about 200 businesses in 5 forestry sectors, including flooring, energy granules, and wood fabric processing. Now, in Pricewaterhouse's study, recent study in Quebec, there are over 140,000 workers in the sector in 3 sectors. In forestry operations, about 20,000, 55,000 in pulp and paper, and 65,000 in the 3rd sector. Now, what's interesting in the wood product sector is that the jobs actually are across about 960 businesses, but a good proportion comes from the secondary sector for value-added products. Also, 63% of businesses represent 2/3 of businesses. Now, to come back to what was said before regarding the diversification strategy, We know that we all face the trade problems we've seen since spring and before for Canada. Diversification can be achieved in two ways. Either we sell our products in other export markets, or we sell new products in out of quota in an out of quota format. And that would reduce our reliance on the U.S. in a number of ways. For our industry in Western Canada, the solution of going to turning towards Asia has been very good. BC has done excellent work over the past few years. It's geographically more difficult for businesses in the eastern portion of the country, so it's better to focus on value-added products that are then exported to the U.S. and overseas. And these products are, we see over 4 times of the value of just simple lumber in these value-added products. In the U.S., we see that there's a strong growth in this sector of value-added products because there's a shortage of workers there and because of the measures for fighting climate change. So this strategy was established in Quebec in 2016. The objective is to go from $400 million in exports in value-added products to $3 billion by 2030. That's $400 million in 2020, $200 million before that. And now we want to increase that to $3 billion. Now, looking just at the softwood lumber sector, well, if we take $500 million worth and we transform and process those products, we quadruple the value of those products. We have a lot of work to do. We started 3 years ago, but the perspectives are great. Now, in terms of recovery in the construction sector in North America, well, that will be a key to our sector. The basics in the U.S. are all set up for a stronger construction sector. We're at lower levels in terms of historical averages for housing starts, so there's room for growth. And there's a renewal of interest in single-family homes outside urban centers. That's a new trend. There are also the climate change measures that are coming into place in Europe, for example, and elsewhere. And there is an opportunity to replace strong carbon emitters in products that we currently have. I agree with what Mr. Roberts said earlier this morning. We have made a lot of effort for construction and other sectors and products, but now we need to look at performance rather than technologies and products. We need to put in place strategies and policies that will force a look at better measures. And I can tell you that for our sector, that will be a win. It is more noble route than trying to be very prescriptive in other ways. We've seen this in Europe when there are performance measures put in place and that everybody has the right and everybody strives to achieve these standards. Well, we see a better outcome than with prescriptive policies. Now, in order to succeed...
Quickly, sir.
Oui, alors il y a 2 éléments que je pour...
There are 2 points that I want to focus on: marketing and exports. We have a program.
Yep.
Very quickly.
Thank you. Alors, il faut augmenter.
So we need to see a better expanding market opportunities program to better expand our value-added products program. Right now, it's geared towards going overseas, but we need to increase that. Thank you very much.
Right. Thank you, sir. Okay. First up, either Mr. Zimmerman or Mr. McLean, I'm going to guess.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And let me start by thanking our guests today, Ms. Yurkovich, Mr. Cripps, and Mr. Labbe. Thank you for coming and enlightening us on our decisions and our study we have to do here. I'm going to start my questions with Mr. Cripps. Mr. Cripps, can you talk to me about the proposed clean fuel standards and how you see it affecting your stakeholders in Alberta, if you could, please?
With the clean fuel standards, we are watching that very closely, MP McLean, and we feel done right, set up right, it would be of benefit to our industry, but we are working very closely with other industries that may be impacted by the clean fuel standards and trying to make sure that it is done in such a way that's measured and appropriate for multiple industries, not just for the forest industry. So it is something that we think done right, not only society but our industry will benefit from. But it actually has to be done in a very measured way that doesn't cause over harm to a number of our industries.
Well, thank you. Can you talk about some of the bioenergy plants? And I noticed on your website, I think it's Miller Western has an investment in an anaerobic bioenergy platform that I believe was funded by Alberta's TIER program. Is that correct? Or its predecessor?
That is correct. We do see lots of benefit to the use of bioenergy, and something that we are working with not only the TIER program but ERA Emissions Reduction Alberta is the entity that actually has both industry funding and government funding that looks to take advantage to move the needle on reducing carbon footprint. And so biomass certainly is something that we are working with our industry to make sure that we are taking advantage of, and I really feel that the whole bioenergy side of the equation for forestry is just getting started.
Agreed. Can you talk about the actual contribution from the TIER fund into this type of facility you have at Miller Western, please?
I will have to get back to you on that specific MP McLean in terms of the Miller Western operation. We can certainly get some additional information for you in writing.
Oh, thank you. Would is there any federal assistance with that program as well?
That I'll have to get back to you as well, MP McLean. My apologies.
Okay. So as far as the different levels, you look at the TIER application, Emissions Reduction Alberta, where your members are obviously an important part of contributing to both efficiency in your industry and also benefiting from the dollars that come from the large emitters that are recycled into actually reducing emissions in your industry. Do you see the pancaking of legislation between the federal and the provincial government as far as how they're approaching this situation with different types of tax, or is there a more efficient way of doing it?
I'll actually more pivot to the programming that is available. I know ERA in particular works very closely with federal agencies to ensure that. So I'm going to go more on the funding side than I am going to be on the legislation side and the pancaking. I do know that there is benefit in multiple leverage points between the province and the federal government when it comes to funding for reducing carbon footprint, and we actually do very much benefit from that. And in working closely with ERA in a previous role, I do know that there is good synergies between the provinces and the feds when it comes to program side. In terms of the legislation side, we can always find ways to reduce redundancies and streamline, whether it's red tape or whether it's managing a forest or whether it's actually for reduction of carbon.
Okay, so two different approaches towards carbon reduction. One would be the TIER program, which actually has a cost of carbon, if you will, on large emitters, a price for carbon, and then a carbon tax at the federal level. And the two you don't see kind of impacting each other in any significant way. And now you'll have the clean fuel standard as well. So effectively, three that will affect your industry one way or another, some positively, some negatively. And you don't see those being a lot of, if you call it red tape to weed through at the end of the day?
Certainly our industry is very concerned with layering or stacking of potential regulatory impediments, as well as trying to move the needle on carbon. And something we are watching very closely. And I would say that our industry, yes, would be concerned around layering and tiering of different rules and different models. We have had members that have benefited from the tier programming, and certainly very much appreciate working with ERA to leverage some of the dollars that they receive with respect to that funding.
Okay, and you, as an industry, do you know how much money that you've actually received in these technology projects from the tier funding?
I don't offhand, MP McLean, but that's something we can dig into. I know, it's something we can dig into and provide a written response.
Would you say that your industry has been the main benefactor of the tier programming that's from the large emitters in the province towards getting less, more carbon offsets, if you will, and more plowed into your industry than any other industry in the province?
No, I wouldn't say that. In fact, I would say the energy sector has probably benefited more from the tier programming, but that's something we're working with ERA and others to try to leverage to get additional funding for us. I certainly think, yes, we're working to get whatever we can. But to answer your question, I would say the energy sector has benefited more from the tier funding than the forestry sector.
And yet, the energy industry is also the main contributor to the tier program as well. So net benefit, kind of money in, money out. I'd say probably more so forestry than the oil and gas sector. Correct?
Money in, money out. But I would also say, though, that we have a huge potential within the forestry sector to be that carbon sink, and that can't be undersold. And the fact that a healthy forest, a managed forest that's takes advantage of technologies can actually benefit the economy as a whole. One of the industries then can benefit from that would be the energy sector.
Thanks very much, Mr. McLean. I gave you a little bit extra time there, just in part because we're not going to make it to a second round. So I wanted to make sure the witness had a chance to answer your question. So, okay. Thank you. Mr. Weiler, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'd also like to thank the witnesses for joining us today. I'd like to ask my first question of Mr. Cripps. And you mentioned in your opening about efforts about the mountain pine beetle. And you mentioned the $68 million in funding from NRCan. And I'm wondering if you could just speak a little bit to how important this funding is to enable, to ensure that we have the tools to both combat the outbreak of the mountain pine beetle, as well as to ask you if there are ways we can support the industry to better use these products and market them going forward that are produced from mountain pine beetle infested wood.
So to answer, thank you very much for your question on mountain pine beetle funding. And our industry, our members, were very appreciative of the joint efforts between Minister Regan federally and Minister Dreesen provincially to obtain that funding. It is critically important. We don't need to look much further than Susan's jurisdiction and the devastation that mountain pine beetle had in British Columbia, and the fact that we can try to stem the tide is extremely important. You still, even now, you take a look at the Jasper National Park, and there's still lots of red there. And so our hope is that we can kind of stem the tide of the mountain pine beetle devastation that is starting to move into the Hinton Edson area. So it cannot be understood how important that money is, and the collaborative effort between the province and the federal government is I think a really good example of our two provincial and federal, our jurisdictions working together. In terms of the products themselves, that's something, where we work with a number of our research institutes to try to maintain and enhance the ability to use the wood that has been damaged by mountain pine beetle, and we could always use some additional funding in that regard. But the intent, though, is, and the more important thing is trying to stop and get rid of or reduce the impact of mountain pine beetle. So really, the fact that money has been made available is very much appreciated.
Well, thank you, Mr. Cripps. I'd like to ask my next question of Ms. Yurkovich. And in your opening, you mentioned some of the figures, and I understand COFI recently had a study commissioned called the 2019 Regional Supply Chain Study. I was wondering if you could share some of the major highlights, or more importantly, the implications from that study for our work.
I think it's just, I mean, I mentioned a few of it in a little bit of in my comments. It's a very significant spend, and that, you know, people tend to think, well, this is just jobs in the your rural communities and outside the Lower Mainland. And, you know, in terms of BC, 42% of all the forestry jobs are in the Lower Mainland and southwest part of the province. And of course, our spend is huge in Vancouver, in fact. And those are jobs that people don't traditionally see as being linked to the forest sector. They're jobs in technology, in marketing, logistics, et cetera. And so I think that's really important. There are jobs and there's economic activity in BC in absolutely every region. So when you're thinking about something to help lift our economy up, which is what you guys are thinking about in your committee, this is a place where we have been able to get up and run more quickly. I mean, it's devastating for restaurant owners and tourism operators. We have, though, largely been able to operate safely. So when you're picking some, you know, Clydesdales of the economy, some big horses that can pull very strongly, this is a sector that's very strong in British Columbia, as it is in many other parts of this province, and it can deliver a significant lift if we are able to get some of the foundational challenges met. And there are some, you know, we operate in a global context. We don't operate within the borders. I mean, you've got 3 people from 3 different parts of the province, but we actually don't compete against each other. We're competing against, you know, companies in the world, in Sweden, in Finland, in Russia, et cetera. That's who our competition is. So making sure that we are able to compete, making sure we have good fundamentals here so that this industry can lift communities up is really important.
I couldn't agree more. And in one of your key actions that you mentioned for the federal government to take, you mentioned doubling down on market and product diversification and expanding markets into Asia by BC as being a really good example. And I'm just wondering if you could comment a little bit about the relationship that NRCan has with Kofi, and you know, where and the ability of NRCan and what it should do going forward to help support on more market and product diversification going forward.
Well, we, as a result of the pine beetle epidemic, you know, in the early parts of the 2000s, we had nothing like a burning platform to help you, you know, move and diversify and change the way you do business. And so BC really did lead the charge into Asia, and we do. I mean, Sylvain says we do have a logistical advantage into Asia, but there are other markets in Europe, in other places that are looking for low carbon solutions. And so, you know, it's really hard to do this. There are things that the government can do in terms of opening up markets that industry can't. And there are things that industry can do in terms of the commercial relationships that government can't. So it's really important that it's a partnership. It has been a strong partnership. But I think, to Sylvain's point, there's more work to do, and there's more room for us to double down on that. And I would say, you know, industry government partnerships are not always successful and do not always deliver results. And look, this isn't perfect, but I would say this is a very good example of an industry government partnership, in our view, working very well and delivering results. But I think there's more work to do, and we've got to, I think there's an opportunity for Canadian forest products right now when people are looking for low carbon alternatives, things made from fiber, whether it be packaging for your food or, you know, 2x4s to build your house, or some value added products that are being produced in Quebec or Ontario or elsewhere. This is the time for us. So it's really important that we take advantage of this opportunity.
Great. And you mentioned building on our reputation, building with wood. And I'm just wondering if your membership have been able to take advantage of some of the programs that were announced in Budget 2019, like the Forest Innovation Program and the Investment in Forest Industry Transformation Program, to support this and some other type of innovative products for the forestry sector.
We have, but I would say that, you know, the first thing we could do is use more of our products at home. And we've got a ton of headroom for that. You know, there's a lot of 5- and 6-story buildings being built across this country that we should be championing, and we should be building with wood. But that, you know, we've got to work with developers and specifiers and architects and engineers to get them, you know, more comfortable building with wood, just as we have in Asian markets. We've done a really good job of starting to turn people's attention to wood in some of our export markets. We got work to do at home. And I think, you know, nothing like demonstrating your leadership by doing what you can do at home. And I think there's a lot of opportunity for us to do that, but we need government in all forms. We need all members to be championing this important industry that not only can lift up the economy, but also is perfectly positioned to take advantage of a world that's looking for carbon solution.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Mr. Weiler. Okay, up next we have a rep from the bloc. I'm not sure who's here now.
Je suis de retour, Monsieur le Président.
Okay.
Yes, I am back, Mr. Chair. I missed you. So thank you, the witnesses. I might have a question for Mr. Labbé. I understood that you think market diversification is very important, and for our part, we calculated the effect of the federal government diversification program, and 31% of the jobs in the forest industry are in Quebec. And I see that 78% of the budget for market diversification has been given to Quebec. How come there's this distortion? This program in 2019 represented $64 million. How come Quebec received such a small part of this program to diversify markets?
The idea here is not to search something like what should we do regarding East and West. I think we have to do both developing our export market and developing new products for diversification. So the idea here is not to reduce the existing effort we develop with Canada Wood, with Kofi, and then the rest of the team. I think the idea is now we see a good opportunity for developing more diversification in products with Quebec, Ontario, and Maritimes mainly on the value-added side. And so we need probably to improve and bonify this program for this value-added sector without touching the effort that we're doing now on diversification and markets. So it's a double effort, and the amount are not that far, that big. I think it's the strategic move that we need to decide right now, because the option for East is also will also create values and make our dependence on US less.
OK. Merci. Merci de votre...
Thank you for your answer. I understand that this is not your job. It is up to politicians to point out this difference. In your presentation, you said that there were 4 times more impact when you take into account the added value. But perhaps this is because the program does not take into account the added value.
2000, almost 20 years ago, I was one of the founder of the program, and the idea at the time was to expand new markets, mainly to emerging markets like China and Southeast Asia at the time and Middle East. So that was the idea. And we were afraid of including US because of the potential risk of the softwood lumber agreement. But this risk is now clear that for value-added products like housing kits or engineered wood, there's no tax, there's no duty, there's no blockade in US. So the program has switched slowly 2 years ago to include value added in US, but it's just the first step. I think we need more funding and more opening for the SMEs in Quebec, Ontario, and Maritimes to develop this specific value added potential.
Je vais juste revenir sur ce que vous...
I just want to come back to what you've just said. Better financing for value-added products. What would that look like in a federal program?
There's not only the market. The strategy here should be in a lot of different aspects. The first is the market development that we did regarding in the program of Canada with an EMO. But there's also a big effort to do in innovation and new product development. We are in the process like to establish a numeric wall, like wood construction 2.0. As you know, we are doing our buildings here with like Noah's Ark still. We just changed the hammer for an electronic hammer. But there's a new industrialized technology that is in development, and it's growing very fast, and we can feel it. We have big companies like Catera or Polcom in Poland that, like the Germans hotel, these Hôtel Germain, just built 2 hotels, one in Calgary, one in Newfoundland. And the Hôtel Germain use Polcom, a Polish company, to do those prefab hotels here in Canada. So what's that? So they told me that we are not ready to quote for this. We're not structured enough with the new numeric system. Wait a minute. What is our role here in the future? Do we want to sell 2x4 to Poland to make them receive ship back housing kits in Canada? So we need to wake up fast, because this growing demand of wood frame construction because of carbon regulations in the world will create a big demand for these structural components and value-added products. We need to act now.
Thank you. I'm going to...
Une petite question rapide pour terminer, Monsieur le Président.
A quick question to finish, Mr. Chair.
And answered in about 25 seconds. I'm going to say yes.
Je veux juste revenir. Oui. Monsieur l'abbé, je veux juste revenir.
Would it not be essential to have a criterion for the carbon impact for the government contracts to support the forest industry?
More result is not a wood first policy or please use wood, or the system was a performance-based carbon with fixed numbers that mandatory. This push everyone to use wood without telling the word wood. Wood becomes the material of choice because of the benefit and the performance.
Thank you, sir. I'm gonna have to stop you there. We are really behind schedule here. Mr. Cannings, you're last up for 6 minutes.
Okay, thank you. And I just want to, I'll let perhaps Monsieur Labbé finish that thought about the government procurement and setting targets for, and Monsieur Simard for asking that question about government targets for using wood in buildings by making it a carbon sequestration target in building supplies, because that's what my private member's bill that was introduced in the last Parliament was all about. It's in the Senate now, hopefully coming this way. And perhaps I'll just wrap it all up by asking Monsieur Labbé and Ms. Yurkovich about engineered wood, about mass timber construction, where we are in Canada. I have 2 big plants in my riding, in Structure Lamb and Kolesnikov, more probably on the way. You mentioned Katera, which is just across the border from us in Spokane, Washington. Where are we in terms of, providing government supports for that industry, that technology, in terms of codes, looking for markets, the government procurement side, and how are we stacking up? I was concerned to hear about this Polish company doing business in Canada when we should be leading the way here in the world. So perhaps Monsieur Labbé and then Ms. Yurkovich could jump in.
Ladies first, I think. Susan, please.
Thank you, Sylvain. So I think, I think Sylvain is right. We have we have a lot of work to do in this area. I would say that in British Columbia, there's an initiative underway to really focus on advancing manufactured mass timber components. And I think that's really important. But the first thing you have to do for that is to grow demand. You have to have demand. The market is actually quite efficient. If you have demand for a lot of mass timber buildings in our province, you are going to get more people producing. It's unusual. I mean, you have to have a cost advantage to be able to send these structures, which are, you know, I have 2 boys. They're older now, but I played a lot with Lego. These are sending Lego blocks to construct housing or buildings on site. These are very heavy. So usually, if the transportation costs are going to be high, you're better off to utilize the product close to where it's produced. And so we have that opportunity to do that, but we have to actually grow demand. The first thing we need to do is grow demand for those buildings and those products here, because that will send the market, that will send a signal to the market to put more of those manufacturing plants in place that deliver significant jobs. But I have to go back to what I said in my remarks. The single biggest deterrent for people making those investments is this uncertainty we have around access to fiber at a reasonable cost. If people are making a significant investment decision, they're going to be making that with a 20 or 25-year payback period. They have to be able to know that they're going to have access to fiber at a reasonable cost for a long period of time to justify making significant investments. And so I think that's really critical. It's why some of these fundamental challenges around access to fiber, regulations, and the ability to compete are so critically important. And then just one last comment before I would turn it back to Sylvain is, value-added manufacturing in all of its forms. It's not just mass timber. We produce a whole bunch of things that people don't even know about, like, everything from mass timber to guitar tops. It's a big, long list. And I think what Sylvain said is we've got this opportunity. We've got everybody looking to fiber as a way to make products that have a lighter touch for the planet. But there's a whole range, and we really need to double down on those efforts. I could not agree more with Sylvain. Thank you. Over to you, Sylvain.
Yep, thank you, Susan. Yeah, regarding the performance, it's clear procurement policy. For me, the role of federal government has a key role here. If your procurement policy on federal building or funded buildings by the federal, it's time to put the performance mandatory regulations on energy consumption or carbon, like in Europe. With the new election in US, probably they were late behind us, but they may go fast and catch up on those carbon regulations soon. So it's a good timing to do that, because in Zurich, in Switzerland, they test this performance carbon calculation per square meter regulations, and it increased 50% of wood construction in 2 years. So it's much better than a technology prescriptive policy or a wood first, please use wood, or wood is good. No, let the industry decide what is better by fixing a performance, a strict mandatory performance. And we, the industry, we are confident that we will win the war on this. And it's also legal, because if you put a mandatory material use, you will face some legal problem with our friends from concrete and steel and other industries. So the trend is there. The example from the federal government could be very key here.
Okay, I think I don't know how much time I have left, Mr. Chair, but I think I'll turn to Mr. Cripps. And as of...
You've got about 20 seconds.
Okay. I was a former species at risk biologist in my previous life, and I wanted him to expand on that multi-species approach, because the simplest way to do that would be to use umbrella species like caribou and spotted owl. And I know that those words cause heart palpitations in the forest industry. So I'm just wondering how he would think that would be simpler to move to a multi-species approach for the forest industry.
Great question, and thank you for that. And I don't think it's going to be simpler, but the issue is that we feel that we're being layered one species at a time, and the intent would be, let's stem back, let's take a holistic approach, Let's make sure that we have a working landscape with a multi-species approach, as opposed to caribou and then multi-species of trout and then bullfrog on top of that. So the concern is that our forests are managed in a very holistic way from a mill side, working with the government on Crown land. We'd like to see the species at risk take that similar approach. And if I can just turn back on the demand side on the mass timber conversation that was held, and I know, Mr. Chair, we're running out of time, but just wanted to—
We've already run out of time, actually, so if you can really be really efficient.
Okay, I'll be very quick. Enabling pieces of legislation, such as moving building codes from 6 to 12-story provincially and the National Building Code, critically important. Couldn't agree with Susan Moore and Savannah on growing the demand on mass timber and other value-added products, and I'll leave it at that. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. All right, thanks very much to all our witnesses. Listen, I apologize. We are chronically under time here, and I apologize for that, but we are very grateful for you to take the time to be here today. But we are going to have to suspend the meeting. Thank our witnesses. Everybody will have to sign off and then sign back on. We're going to have some very brief committee business.
Thanks very much.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Okay.
you.